Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is you want me to check out. Today's comes at us from Owen, Atheist, an Incarnation's Dream from their second album Unquestionable Presence. They were innovators of the tech death jazz metal scene. Their amazing bassist Roger Patterson died in a car accident prior to this being released. Well, that's a bummer. Guess I'll be sure to pay attention to the bass work on this, honor him just a little bit. And let's dig into this tech death jazz. Let's go, Atheist. Yeah, beautiful opening so far. We got what, woodblock over to the right? Fun little galloping thing on our cymbals. That is a really jazzy 6. Oh, jeez, that is filthy. The drums are really... I can't even say they're holding it together. They're just as chaotic as everything else in the mix. Yeah, that is a fat bass tone. Yeah, that polyrhythm. Those bass kicks are tight. What in the world? This is a lot. Oh, can't say I was ready for it to be over. I mean, what I mean by that is it didn't sound like it was ready to be over, I think is another way. I pretty much hit overload somewhere in there, and any point finishing it up after like 3 minutes, I think would have been fine by me. They certainly crammed in a lot of music in just 5 minutes. Just wow. Well, in unusual fashion, let's start with the negative before we get into all the positive. I know this is earlier. Looks like 91. The production is a little rough. Now, interestingly, there's a lot of clarity between everything, and that's usually what I look for in more technical bands. It allows me to hear all of the qualities that they're bringing to the table, all of the stuff that makes it technical. If you're muddy and technical, I can't hear the technical aspects, you're losing it on me, and your main draw is not something I can connect with, and that seems counterintuitive. And through that lens, we do have a lot of clarity in the guitars, the bass, the vocals. It really is, though, the drums, specifically the snare and bass kick, I feel that are just a hair bit too muddy. And it makes it difficult to hear some of the more precise, quicker ideas coming off of them. I didn't really pick it up until about 4 minutes in, and then I couldn't unhear it. It was the production on those lower end parts of the kit, and maybe the bass had it as well, but the bass also kind of, I don't know, had a brightness to it that might have overshown it, whereas the bass kick didn't. Regardless, though, I mean, that's really my only complaint here, is that it's a little muddier than I would have liked. And it sort of clashes with a lot of the clarity that the rest of the band's production is. So, with that said, positives. There's a lot here. First of all, we got to look at the metric stuff. This is just bonkers. It reminds me of what was it, Watchtower that we checked out last week, I think it was. Hyper technical, one of the first prog metal bands, I think, is how you guys described them to me. And I kind of had the same critique there about their the way that they modulated rhythmic ideas, is that a lot of it was pushing against time in a way that was immediately recognizable as pushing against time. Right? It's very, very different. Just to give an example of the other end of the spectrum, would be, man, who am I? I don't have a band from the other end of the spectrum, just to roll out. Anyways, where we enter an odd time signature, and you don't really notice it, or we enter a nice polyrhythmic section and you don't really notice that we've gone into it. And they sort of disguise the metric modulation under groove. This band, much like Watchtower, doesn't. They are well within the camp of stuff like what Meshuggah would eventually do with keeping everything 4/4 and just really pushing against it in a way that it doesn't even feel like 4/4 anymore. And that's where these guys are. It is not my favorite kind of modulation, but I appreciate both the fact that they're doing it, which is just especially some of the things they're doing. It's just we'll get into a little bit more of that detail in a second, but and the fact that they were one of the first. right? Maybe even the first. Um, no, that doesn't make sense. They were one of the first, one of the earlier ones. It would be really dumb to say that these were the first people to push against a time signature in 1991. Like, there's so much music that came before it. Somebody had to have done it earlier. But yeah, there's so much pushback against it. And see, the thing is, too, a lot of it deals with accenting off of the beat or ridiculous lead-ins. One thing that they really love to do is 2 or 3 hits, usually 8th or 16th notes on the faster side of things, leading into a downbeat, where the downbeat is only emphasized by half of the band. Usually we'll have a snare and the bass will emphasize it and the guitars won't necessarily. And so you're kind of getting the bass groove here of especially when with the drums are doing it, we get 1 and 3. We get a snare on the front beat. Um, and so we get this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But there's nothing else in the music that helps emphasize that pulse. And so when we get the core pulse from one instrument, but we get a different pulse from another, that's what creates that that jarring rhythmic element that so much of this song is based upon. And it's everywhere. You really can't escape it. Um, and it makes up so much of the track. We move between 4/4 and what I think is probably, I don't know, 3/4. I think would be the without changing tempo. Yeah, we'd probably be in 3/4. But now, by the end of the track, I was like, was it 3/4 or was it polymetric against 4/4? Because the section itself, I couldn't find a core pulse to it. If you noticed when I was conducting the 3, which is down, side, up, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Whenever I was conducting that, none of them, except maybe the one, was landing on an accented beat with the band. So what they were playing might have been juxtaposed to a 3/4, but might have fit better with something else. Um, and the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe the whole song is in 4/4. And at this point, without having listened to it again, I don't know. I can't answer with any definitive authority whether this song shifted into a 3 or stuck with 4 for the entirety of it. And that confusion is entirely supported by their wild rhythmic ideas. There's so many sections in here that just really threw me for a loop rhythmically because it was sort of anti-groove. If groove is a way to emphasize specific beats of a pulse, this was a way to de-emphasize beats of a pulse. Maybe to not emphasize any or to emphasize beats outside of the pulse. Um, yeah, that's what I want to call this type of music. Stuff like this and watch. I was going to say Meshuggah, but Meshuggah enters a groove state. It's just outside of the core pulse. But stuff like this pushes against the groove entirely. Oh, anti-groove rock. Anti-groove metal. That's what I want to call it. I don't know if that'll stick. I'll run with it for an episode and we'll see if it works. So we can say I coined it. Here's proof. I coined it. But that's what it really does feel like. They say, well, this is our metronome. Let's never play on it. In fact, let's not really create a groove outside of it either. And so many of these sections are just really difficult to follow. And there's even some points where I'm not sure if we shifted to a 7/8, which would be 4/4 without an eighth note, without half of a beat. So it'd be like 3.5/4 instead of 4/4. And I'm not sure if that happened or if I just lost track of where the pulse was. And we still did 4/4, but we lurched forward based on the rhythm they were playing against that core 4/4. Yeah, I don't know. This is so much rhythmic information to take in on a first listen. And there's so much of it too, which is it takes me right to my next point is they crammed so much music into 5 minutes. There must have been eight, nine sections in here. I think there was some repetition. There were a couple riffs I heard get repeated back. I'm like, oh yeah, that's from, 3 minutes ago now. But I don't remember hearing like a verse, chorus, bridge idea. It felt fairly linear in a lot of places. We might have had a verse and a chorus, and that's what I remember them calling back to at the end. But I mean, that would be like A, B, C, D, E, F, A, B kind of idea, where we do return to a verse chorus by the end of the track. But the bridge, everything that happens between our beginning verse chorus and our final verse chorus, is like an entirely different, complete song on its own. um, and it's just, there's so much to it. And then even within the structure itself being varied with as many sections as it has, there's a lot of instrumentation of musicality going on as well. We have the guitars, we have the drums, we have the bass, we have the vocals, and these are all getting layered too. I already mentioned that we typically have two rhythmic ideas going on, either a front or a backbeat snare thing going on to give us the pulse in many of the 4/4 sections, against whatever rhythmically jarring thing the rest of the instruments want to do. The bass occasionally has its own lines that are juxtaposed to what the guitars are doing. The vocals bring their own rhythmic structure and texture to the sections that they're present in. Um, it's just it's so much of so much. And through all of this, it feels like the song wants to fall apart at times. And it's not just particularly because of the structure. It's not particularly because of the metric stuff. This song moves at a blistering pace. It is just constantly moving, and every time I listened to the vocals, I felt like they were rushing, but then the band would be on par with them, tempo-wise. And I'm like, did we just have a minor accelerando? Did we just speed up a little bit? Was it an optical illusion or an auditory illusion, I suppose, in this case? There's a term for this that I think might be applicable here, which is where the vocals, well, not necessarily vocals, a lead instrument might speed up or slow down at certain parts where the rest of the band doesn't, where the supporting parts don't. Um, in order to elongate or quickly move through a passage to emphasize it. This happens a lot in musical theater to give emotional impact to vocal lines, lyrics. Um, and so you might speed up, but you'll end at the same point. If you speed up a little bit now, you're going to have to slow down a little bit later because the band isn't matching you. And I forget what this term is called. And in the middle of this track, I was like, is that what's going on here? Because the vocalist feels elastic and the band doesn't, but the band also frequently feels like they're going to fall apart because of all the metric stuff going on. So I can't really use that as a good gauge of time because I sometimes don't even know where we're at. As I mentioned earlier, there's sometimes where the bar ended earlier than I thought, and I didn't know if we had shifted time signatures to a shorter time signature or if I've lost track of the pulse. So time ends up feeling really strange here in this track. And the vocalist's flexibility of temporal usage doesn't help that at all, doesn't help keep a more concrete element of time. And it all kind of works well in this idea of a dream. I don't necessarily know what an incarnation's dream is. I'm going to look up the word. Like, I know what incarnation is, but I don't know how an incarnation could have a dream. So maybe I'm missing a definition of it, or maybe I just need refreshed on it. It's more of a gut feeling of what an incarnation is. It's like one of those words you couldn't define on your own, but you know it when you see it. So I gotta brush up on that when I hit the lyrics. But the idea of a dream, I think, works really well in here because there's so many instances where I didn't know where the floor was. I was floating, and sometimes I could put my feet on solid ground, but the next step would not necessarily be on solid ground, or maybe the ground was in a different position. It wasn't a level, floor under my feet. And it ends up feeling very dreamlike because of that, not because of an atmospheric thing, which is usually where dreamlike fits in when we look at atmospheric tracks. Post rock can get very dreamlike at times. This is dreamlike because it's so abstract in a lot of ways, and it reaches that point in your dreams where things are definitely not like they are in reality, but there's enough to keep it grounded. That's what this feels like. It is metal in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of things in here that work exactly as I expect them to, but for just as many things as I expect to happen, there's so many that end up going through that I have no idea what just happened and don't make any sense to me. And in that way, the music very much feels like a dream. Still on the topic of the vocalist, I want to focus a little bit on the texture of the harshes. There's a cleanliness to them that kind of reminds me of power metal or heavy metal. That's what I want, not power metal. Although power metal uses the heavy metal style of vocals as well. But if it were transformed and mutated into a harsh. I don't know if anybody else gets that. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else. If not, that's fine. I'm going to try to explain this a little bit, but that's what I feel like. It has a bit of a vibrato and an immediacy and a brightness to it that I tend to correlate with heavy metal style of vocals, the belting specifically. It has a power to this harsh, but it also is firmly rooted in fry vocal. I'd almost wager to say there are no vocal cord usage in this at all. This is pure fry. This is a pretty typical scream. Am I wrong? I mean, I'm not a vocal coach. I'm going completely off a timbre here. Uh, but I think it's interesting that there is almost a melodic element to the vocals through both pitch and, like I said, sort of this vibrato brightness that I didn't know you could get with harshes. And so part of me thinks that this is a compressed clean, a heavily compressed clean, but I've never heard anything like it. So I don't know, but I enjoyed it. That's not usually something I say for a harsh vocal first take. I usually have to warm up to different harsh vocals. But no, it just fine. It was good, kind of. I think it's because it just meets that middle ground. It is harsh in a lot of ways, but there's still a lot of qualities I associate with clean vocals to it, despite, again, I don't think there's vocal cord work going on in here. So, I don't know, it makes no sense to me. We're gonna hit the lyrics and we'll see if there's anything else dreamlike in here. Lyrically, this is a lot less dense than the music. It's pretty clearly stated, unless I'm missing some metaphor here. It seems to be about a deity looking in on a world, possibly our world, and noticing that there's so much, uh, what's the word? So much negativity to it. Um, he says it's a land of plenty, but a dynasty of disgrace. Suffering, that's the word I want. There's so much suffering. A land of plenty. There is more than enough room for everyone. There's more than enough food for everyone. And yet we have people who are poor. We have people dying in the streets. We have dogs that don't have enough food or medical attention. It's not just the humans, it's also the, well, presumably the humans, but also the animals that they rule over. He says it's a dynasty of disgrace. And he goes on to speak rhetorically, that's the word I want, to the people living here. That all you really have to do is think outside the box, and you'll see that there's plenty of things here, and that this isn't the way it has to be. Um, even going on to say, having a bit of criticism about consumerism and the way that it manipulates our minds and has wired us to want things we don't need. Um, it also, interestingly, says, don't dignify a false spy in the sky. I like this line because I don't know if it's particularly alluding to anything, but I think it's interesting in that at least my first thought was a monotheistic God. In particular, probably the Judeo-Christian God. Don't dignify this. There is no spy in the sky, which I think is an interesting way to phrase that. But it says reroute your path, and you can change your mind and see how much you've grown just by doing that. Don't fall into your old habits. Actually be critical and analyze the world around you and figure out what is important for you. Even says that you should be walking around with a mind of your own. At the end, the final stanza, after viewing all of these uh, negative aspects with this world, says, it's been my dream to re-enter the stream, to let the carnates know what life really means. If one understands, it's all I can ask. Life to you is such a wretched task. Almost as if to say that this deity wants to reincarnate onto this planet and be a beacon for at least one person, to at least change one mind. At least that's how I read it. So it's not about a dream, it's about somebody's goals, what they wish they could do, how they want the future to be. Um, in which case, my whole dreamlike illusion I spoke about earlier doesn't match up at all. However, if this music is supposed to embody the mind and emotions and thoughts of a deity, I think that works. I mean, the honest read is probably that this is the music they make and these are the lyrics the lyricist wrote and they smashed them together, and that most of their music is probably similar. But I like the perspective that if we were to be in the mind of a deity, it probably is nothing like a mortal mind. It would not make any sense to us, despite the words them saying making perfect sense. How they come to these conclusions, what kind of processes their mind goes through to create the words to speak. It might even be that their native tongue would be incomprehensible to us. And so they have to put translation into it to speak something that we would understand. Like, there's so many ways that a deity could be different enough to seem similar enough in some forms, but chaotically disjointed in others, that having the music be like that, I think marries well with the idea of a song told through the perspective of a being from another layer or level of reality. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Atheists and Incarnation's Dream. Let me know what you thought. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed it, if there was anything that stood out to you, anything I said you'd like to add on to, maybe things I missed or were wrong about and you want to correct me on them. Let me know. Above the comment section in the description box, you can find a link to Linktree, takes you here. You can find links to my music, a link to the Discord server, ways to support the channel, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. Join me tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. We'll continue on with this week's theme of bagpipes and check out another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.